Hi everybody, welcome to Grace Walk. I'm glad to have you join me today. I hope you have had a wonderful week. I'm glad to be back with you today talking about the subject that I love most, which is grace. Grace is a subject that is difficult to define because it can be applied in so many different ways, but it is a subject that I love to describe. All of the Apostle Paul's writings began with grace and ended with grace. Grace is the fountainhead from which everything we can know about God flows. I mean, the sad reality is, though, that although some people don't want this life of ease that comes with grace, it is applicable to every one of us. But there are a lot of folks that would rather have the religious, dead, rigid rules. Some things just haven't changed. You know, I grew up in a legalistic church world where I was told that we had to do certain things in order to please God and to be blessed by God. That's the very definition of legalism. Legalism is the whole system of living in which we think that we gain spiritual progress or earn God's blessings based on what we do, but that's not what grace is about. Grace is not about because of what you do or don't do. It's not about our behavior. Grace is the goodness extended toward us because we're in Jesus Christ and for no other reason at all. Sadly, in the modern church world, a lot of folks don't want to hear about grace. Is that weird or what? They don't want to hear the truth about pure grace. But you know, this is not a new problem. Even in the Bible, Jesus encountered people like this. In fact, we're going to begin today with the scripture by looking at a text out of John chapter 1, verses 8 through 43. Let's look at this passage together. And I want you to see the way the Bible describes this encounter that Jesus had with these religious people. It says there, "Then Jesus turned to the Jews who had claimed to believe in him. If you stick with this, living out of what I tell you, you are my disciples for sure. Then you'll experience for yourselves the truth, and the truth will set you free." Surprised, they said, "But we're descendants of Abraham. We've never been slaves to anyone. How can you say the truth will set you free?" Jesus said, "I tell you most solemnly that anyone who chooses a life of sin is trapped in a dead-end life and is, in fact, a slave. A slave is a transient who can't come and go at will. The Son, though, has an established position, the run of the house. So if the Son sets you free, you are free through and through. I know that you're Abraham's descendants, but I also know that you're trying to kill me because my message hasn't yet penetrated your thick skulls. I'm talking about things I've seen while keeping company with the Father, and you just go on doing what you've heard from your father." They were indignant. "Our father is Abraham." Jesus said, "If you were Abraham's children, you would have been doing the things Abraham did, and yet here you are trying to kill me, a man who has spoken to you the truth he got straight from God. Abraham never did that sort of thing. You persist in repeating the works of your father." They said, "We're not bastards. We have a legitimate father, the one and only God. If God were your father," said Jesus, "you would love me, for I came from God and arrived here. I didn't come on my own. He sent me. Why can't you understand one word I say? Here's why. You can't handle it." It's pretty strong, huh? I mean, that's strong language. That is a translation of the Bible that shows that there's nothing quite like the attitude of the deluded, religious-minded person. Nothing is quite so calloused, confrontational, or cruel as a religious person whose sacred cows are being poked with the stick of truth. When somebody's religious identity is being challenged, things are bound to get nasty very quickly. C.S. Lewis was right when he wrote about it. He said this, he said, "Of all the bad men, religious bad men are the worst." That kind of attack Jesus experienced is still all too common today. When somebody comes along portraying God the Father in a way that offends the moral sensitivities of those whose lives are rooted in religious dogmatic practices, the legalist religionist, they just can't get past the reality that God is not a God who sits and watches our behavior with strict scrutiny. To them, there are divine expectations that have been placed on us, and we better make sure we meet those expectations or else. Well, this conversation that I just read to you from the Bible between Jesus and the religious powers that be that surrounded him, it was triggered after he had demonstrated love and tenderness toward the woman caught in adultery. They wanted to stone her. He wanted to save her. Pardon, payback. They've always been polar opposites. The baseline of a lot of the religious conflict that still goes on today boils down to one question: how loving is God? Is he into payback or pardon or both? Well, how you answer that question may be the most important thing in life, because your viewpoint on this very thing will affect everything. It will frame how you view God, how you see others, and even how you see yourself. Well, where does something like justice fit into this whole matter? Justice is an important subject. I mean, the Bible talks about it, and people say, well, yeah, Steve, you talk about the grace of God and you describe him pouring out love and showing that kind of compassion, but what about the justice of God? Doesn't that fit into this whole thing? Well, absolutely it does. It makes me think of a conversation I had with somebody one day about this thing. She said, she said to me, I believe God is a God of love, but he's also a God of justice and even wrath. You can't leave those out without giving an unbalanced picture of the nature of God. Well, I completely understood what she was saying. I got the objection because there was a time when I would have given the exact same answer to any teaching about divine love that didn't seem to make room for divine justice and wrath. How do these two fit together? Are justice and wrath aspects of God's nature? And if they are, then how do we reconcile them with the idea that God is love at his very core? You see, God doesn't just love, he is love. So how then does all this come together in a way that fits, or can it? In an attempt to embrace and affirm the love of God, some folks have just completely rejected the concepts of God's justice and God's wrath. But that's hard to do when you read the Bible, because the Bible does talk about divine justice and divine wrath. But it's not necessary to explain either one away. What we need to do is understand the words the way they were used when they were first written. What words meant and how we understand them today don't always mean the same thing. N.T. Wright, the theologian from the UK, said this. He said, just because some Western theologians can't see how certain categories fit coherently together, doesn't mean those categories didn't fit in the first century. And that's the point that we're going to make when we understand and talk about the original meaning of these biblical topics like justice and wrath through our 21st century biases. Some things don't mean what we believed they mean. We're going to take a closer look at that, the justice of God, and we're going to see it in its historical contextual context right after we come back from this word. So when we talk about divine justice, how do we align that with divine grace? And I was saying before the break that we need to understand the original meaning of the word justice, because the contemporary common understanding of the word is the reason a lot of folks have a view that causes God in their mind to stand in complete contradiction to who Jesus Christ revealed him to be. The modern understanding of the word justice actually finds its roots in the area of law. It's a view that's solidly fixed in a system of law, and it focuses on retribution, a kind of retribution that balances the books by paying back those that have done wrong with a punishment that fits the crime. This approach to justice sees payback as a morally correct matter and something that's fully deserved. It's the kind of justice that's designed to guide in the courtrooms of society. But this understanding of what justice means, it is the backbone of our legal system today. Our Western idea of justice actually has its origins in 6th century BC Athens, with Solon, who was a poet-philosopher that came into power in Greece during revolutionary times. His goal was to transform the culture of retaliation that had marked society for hundreds of years. Solon built up a matrix for a democratic approach to justice through writing and then rewriting constitutions that set a public court system in place. Now listen up. It was a system with juries of peers involved in an adversarial legal process and overseen by a presiding judge. Sound familiar? The influence of this justice system can be traced all the way back to ancient Greece, and it can be seen in every courtroom today. It's the idea that when somebody does wrong, there needs to be punishment to make things right. If you understand God through that template, you're going to see Him primarily as a divine courtroom judge whose sense of justice requires that He pass verdict and impose sentence on people who've done wrong. And you'll believe that the whole issue of consequences for sin is a matter of what is fair. In fact, fairness will frame your whole concept of divine justice. With that perspective in mind, you'll see the garden narrative in Genesis as a story where God punished Adam and Eve for what they did. Even worse, you'll end up seeing the crucifixion of Jesus as punishment from God the Father instead of as punishment from sin itself. You'll see a lot of end-time events as the unfolding of divine anger that comes from what you think is divine justice. From beginning to end, it'll all be about this sort of justice that actually stands in contradiction and tension to love. It's a viewpoint that, while saying God is love, ends up concluding that His hands are tied when it comes to how He can express love, because after all, His justice demands payback, and He has to do what justice demands. Well, I want to ask you a question. Is there another way that this could be considered? Another way to look at it? Is it possible that we've been wrong about what divine justice is, and there's another way to see it? Well, the fact is there is another way of understanding justice, and it's one that finds its root in grace. It's not concerned so much with retribution as it is restoration. The goal in this kind of justice is to make the victim whole, to heal the offender, and to integrate him back into society as a productive person. The goal in this kind of justice is to make things right for everybody. It's not about payback. In fact, its goal is about put back. Put back everything in the order it belongs. It's a biblical concept that finds its source in the very heart of our triune God. God isn't an impartial judge who governs the human race with a dispassionate, distant approach. He's our Abba. The word means daddy, whose heart burns with love toward the people He's created. He wants to make things right in our lives so that we can know and experience the life we were created to know. I mean, Jesus didn't come to just point out where we'd created a problem. He came to fix it, and that's exactly what He did. He came to show us that while we may choose to live in the imaginary rejection produced by Adam's mind when he sinned in the Garden of Eden, the fact is that God is into restoration, not rejection. In John chapter 12, verses 47 through 50, listen to what Jesus had to say about this. He said, "If anyone hears what I am saying and doesn't take it seriously, I don't reject him. I didn't come to reject the world. I came to save the world, but you need to know that whoever puts me off, refusing to take in what I'm saying, is willfully choosing rejection. The Word made flesh that I've spoken and that I am, that Word and no other is the last word." You get it? Jesus said you can choose rejection, but gracious acceptance has chosen you and embraced you. He's acted based on His own goodness, not what you see as your badness. And believe me, His goodness will always be bigger than your badness, the badness that you think defines you. God has acted in justice to make things right for everybody because of His great love. What we do with it might be questionable, but what He's done is not up for negotiation. He said, "It is finished." You might choose rejection, but Jesus said you don't get the last word. He said, "The great I am is that word, and no other is the last word." The heart of God has always been one of restoration and reconciliation, not one of revenge. Let me give you this verse before we go to the break. Listen to this in Isaiah. As you read it, answer these two questions. What does the Lord want to do toward you? And second, why does He want to do that? All right, here's the verse. Listen. Yet the Lord longs to be gracious to you. He rises to show you compassion, for the Lord is a God of justice. Well, according to that verse, what does God want to do? He wants to be gracious to you. He wants to show you compassion. Why? Because He's a God of justice. Does that sound like somebody who needs to balance the books by punishing you for what you've done wrong? This is the justice of love, not law. And so the justice of God then is something that will affect everything about our lives and everything about every single relationship we have when we reframe its meaning and we understand it in a more clear way. After the break, I want to end the program today by showing you a short example of how this will affect the kind of relationship that you have with other people. And believe me, when you understand the justice of God toward you and you're transformed by that, it'll transform the relationship you have to others. We'll be back with more right after this. So divine justice then is not what we thought. It's not God paying us back for something. Divine justice is when God puts back things in the order that they belong in, because that's what love does. This idea of payback, that is a judicial kind of justice that came out of the courts of the land. It didn't come out of the heart of our Creator. So when we understand then that the heart of our Creator is to show us a kind of love that restores instead of brings retribution, that's going to change the way it looks in our lives. How does this grace-based kind of justice look in the relationships we have with other people? Well, let me give you a few Bible verses that'll answer. The prophet Zechariah is a good example. Here's what he said in Zechariah 7. This is what the Lord Almighty says: administer true justice, show mercy and compassion to one another. Or Jeremiah. Here's what he said. This is what the Lord says: administer justice every morning. Rescue from the hand of his oppressor the one who has been robbed. So there you go. Show mercy and compassion. Defend. Rescue. I mean, these are words associated with justice that flows from divine love. Jesus was sent to bring the Father's justice to humanity. What was that to look like? Well, here's the prophecy that described how He would bring justice into the world. It's out of Matthew chapter 12. Listen to this. Look well at my hand-picked servant. I love him so much, take such delight in him. I've placed my Spirit on him. He'll decree justice to the nations, but he won't yell, won't raise his voice. There'll be no commotion in the streets. He won't walk over anyone's feelings, won't push you into a corner. Before you know it, His justice will triumph, and the mere sound of His name will signal hope, even among far-off unbelievers. Have you ever seen God's justice in this way? You might have understood justice only through the template of retribution, but there's a higher way that expresses justice and grace. It's a way of restoration that lifts up and makes right things that were wrong. God is just to have forgiven sin because Jesus righted the wrong done by Adam, and we're all the beneficiaries of His finished work. But Somebody's going to say, well, how's that fair? The word justice is so strongly associated with revenge that it takes strong evidence for most people to change their minds about it. After all, it just wouldn't be fair if people got away with terrible behavior without any punishment from God at all. Well, at least that's what a lot of people think. But I hope that by now you can see that God's justice doesn't require Him to bring payback to those that have done wrong. Instead, His justice has caused Him to embrace all of us and motivated Him to act to restore us to the original image to which we were created, which is His image. And while we're on the subject of fairness, let's go ahead and get this out of the way. Grace isn't fair. It's just not. That might be why the Apostle Paul said that grace is a scandal to the religious mind. He called it a stumbling block in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 23. But the word in the original language of the New Testament is the word scandalon in the Greek, from which we get the word scandal. Nothing strangles sanctimonious sensitivities like the idea of people getting away with something. I'll read you one of my favorite authors, Robert Capon. Listen to the way he described it. He said, "For in our fantasies, immorality can never be allowed simply to succeed. Cosmic disapproval must be given the last word. The assignation is accomplished, but the lover's water pump breaks down on the way home, necessitating a call to his wife to pick him up 30 miles off course. The beloved gives herself entirely, but her husband's firm moves him to Dallas, and out of the very givingness for which she is loved, she packs up dolls and dishes and goes sadly into the sunset, or she loses a child in a fire that starts while she's in the motel with her lover, or her lover loses his nerve, or they marry at terrible cost and both lose their interest. Whatever happens, the books are always balanced, the notes due called in, the mortgages foreclosed." That's the description that's based on an expectation that comes directly from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It was only when Adam ate from that tree that morality and immorality became the parameters by which lifestyles are typically built and judged. Until then, no such moral dualism existed. Everything was God, and that was enough. But that lie from Eden still hangs heavily in the air. In the suffocating air of moralism, not just morality, but moralism. And it's become the prevailing religion of the world, and sadly, the modern evangelical church world has not escaped its contaminating influence. It still exalts morals as the principal aspiration of a life well lived. It advocates that age-old lie that sooner or later we're all going to get what we deserve. Might be good, might be bad. That all depends on how we behave right now. But I'll tell you, the ministry and the life of Jesus stands in stark contradiction to that and denies that completely. His whole life was a testament to a grace that transcends moral fairness, and that is why he infuriated the religious moralists of his day. And the truth is, his message of grace still does. I hope that if this idea of justice and this kind of lavishing love toward people to restore them instead of bring retribution to them, I hope it takes root in your heart. Because I'll tell you, if you've grown up in the evangelical church world, it would be easy to scream it's not fair. But the good news is grace is not fair. We'll talk more about this in next week's program. I hope you'll join me then. Until then, I'd love to have you connect to me on the internet. Come on over to stevemcveigh.com and you can find out what we're doing over there. I meet with an online group live every day. And I've got a lot of things on the internet, on Facebook and YouTube. Come on over and connect there. And I'll see you again next time. May you be blessed in your own grace walk. Until then, bye-bye.